Hi, welcome to another episode of Fighters Backstage. Today I'll tell you how to take care of your boxing gloves, how to maintain them, how to clean them, and what to do if they start to develop an unpleasant odor. Let's get started. Anyone who has ever used boxing gloves knows that after a while an unpleasant odor starts to come from them. What should you do once that unpleasant smell has appeared? And most importantly, what can you do to prevent that unpleasant smell from developing in the first place? To answer this question, we first need to explain what causes that unpleasant odor to form inside the gloves. The source of the unpleasant smell coming from inside the gloves is mold and fungi, which develop in the gloves due to high temperatures, moisture, and various contaminants that get inside. These factors create the perfect environment for mold and fungi to grow. They are the main source of the unpleasant odor. The later you start combating them, the deeper they will penetrate into the structure of the gloves, and the harder it will be to restore your gloves to a usable state later on. What can you do to prevent your gloves from getting musty? What can you do to prevent mold and fungi from developing inside your gloves? First and foremost, we have the ability to limit the moisture inside them. The fundamental and crucial rule you must always diligently follow is to train exclusively with proper boxing wraps or protective inner gloves, or indeed anything that effectively separates your hand from the interior lining of the glove itself. The purpose of inner gloves or wraps is not only to provide extra protection and support for your hands, but also to create a layer of insulation against the moisture that forms on your hands during exercise. The idea is for as much moisture as possible to be absorbed by the boxing wraps, which you can easily wash or replace after some time, thereby protecting the inside of the glove from getting sweaty. Of course, some amount of moisture will always get into the gloves. We can't really avoid this, especially if we have long training sessions, where after the gloves get sweaty, a certain amount of moisture will get inside the glove. That's why it's very important to dry the gloves immediately after training. You can actually start the glove drying process right away, immediately after training. Most people just throw their gloves into the backpack, zip it up and forget about it. Often they even forget about the training itself, and when they get home they don't open the backpack to dry the gloves. And that's a big mistake, because in reality the glove drying process should start immediately after training. How do you do that? First of all, don't seal the gloves tightly like this. Instead, right after finishing your training, undo the Velcro so that the inside of the glove is left open. Of course, if you feel the need, you can also insert something here to improve the airflow even more. But at the stage when you're just finishing your training and putting the gloves in your backpack, that's not necessary yet. All you really need to do is undo the Velcro, toss the gloves into your bag, and there will already be some airflow getting inside the gloves. When you get home, you should take the gloves out as soon as possible and leave them to dry at room temperature. Here as well, make sure that the inside of the glove is as exposed as possible, so you can ensure proper air circulation inside the gloves. And the second thing you need to pay attention to is that the gloves should dry at room temperature. Some people try to dry their gloves with hair dryers or by leaving them on a radiator. This is not a good solution because high temperatures can damage the surface of the glove. Very often gloves are made, for example, from natural leather, which does not tolerate high temperatures or mechanical drying, because this causes the leather to lose its flexibility and become prone to damage. Room temperature is perfectly sufficient for drying gloves. How long should the drying process take? In fact, the longer the better. In practice, it works well to leave them out overnight. That usually means about a dozen hours. So you come back from training in the evening, take out your gloves, leave them somewhere in an open space with the inner side exposed, with the initial store-bought side of the gloves exposed, and thanks to the airflow, the gloves will gradually dry out. It's worth noting here that not the entire surface of the gloves will be able to dry properly in this natural way, because while the front part of the glove naturally gets airflow, the curved back part of the glove has quite limited access to air. At this point, it's worth using additional measures that help absorb moisture. There are several moisture absorbers available on the market. We also offer such a moisture absorber, and I'll show you in a moment how to use it. In our range, you'll find a product called the DBX dryer. It's simply 2 sachets filled with a special substance that has a very high moisture absorption capacity. You place this substance directly inside the gloves, but not in the front part, because as I mentioned earlier, the front part can dry naturally. Instead, you insert it as deeply as possible right at the very end of the glove, so that you can help dry out the back part of the glove, where natural airflow is quite limited. In fact, it's a good idea to put a desiccant pouch inside the glove right after training, keeping it handy in your training bag at all times. However, if you don't have one with you, just put the dryer inside the glove when you get home and start drying. This way, the entire surface of the glove, both the front and the back, will be properly dried. The DBX dryer is a product you can use multiple times. Its interior, which absorbs moisture, can be dried after some time, for example by leaving it on a windowsill on a sunny day or placing it on a radiator. Then, the accumulated moisture that was absorbed during the glove drying process will evaporate and you can use it again in your gloves. In practice, you can use this product for many months. Of course, over time it will become less effective, so it's a good idea to replace it after half a year or a year, since it doesn't involve significant costs. But you can definitely use it at least several dozen times, which is already a long enough period to make purchasing such a product worthwhile. Of course, it doesn't have to be our product. You can find any other on the market that offers comparable performance. However, it's worth using these additional dryers to properly dry the back part of the glove here. Alright, now we know what needs to be done to prevent mold and mildew from forming on the gloves, or at least to significantly slow down the process. But what should you do when it's already too late? What should you do if your gloves have already started to emit an unpleasant odor? Because let's be honest, most people only become aware of these processes happening inside their gloves at the stage when that unpleasant smell starts to come out. There are actually a few options available. Whether you'll be able to completely get rid of that unpleasant odor really depends on how much your gloves have already become moldy or mildewed. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, the longer this process goes on, the deeper the mold penetrates into the structure of the gloves and the harder it becomes to remove it later. But if it's just the initial stage of mold growth, you can deal with it quite effectively. So what should you do now? The first step is to thoroughly dry the gloves. You can use a dryer for this, which I mentioned a moment ago. You can also dry them for a sufficient amount of time at room temperature. You can also insert an additional element here that will improve air circulation inside the glove. For example, a tube in the front part that will straighten the glove a bit and allow air to flow inside as well. It doesn't matter how you do it. What matters is that you dry the gloves very thoroughly. Unfortunately, that won't help. The second step is to kill the fungi and mold that have already developed inside. And here's a method that some people have been using for many years. I've personally tried this method several times myself, and I can attest that it's quite effective. And it's about freezing the gloves. The idea is to kill the mold and fungi by exposing them to very low temperatures. All you need to do is pack the gloves in a disposable bag and put them in the freezer, let's say, overnight. The next day you take the gloves out, leave them at room temperature until their natural properties return. It's very important not to train with these gloves immediately after taking them out of the freezer, because leather and synthetic materials as well lose their flexibility when exposed to low temperatures. If you started training with such gloves, it could lead to damage to the surface, cracking of the leather, or splitting of the seams. So after taking the gloves out of the freezer, we leave them for several to a dozen or so hours, and that completes the second stage. In the third stage, I recommend spraying the inside of the gloves with a disinfectant. Just a heads up, it can't be just any product, because in the store you'll find many products that are alcohol-based. Here, I definitely do not recommend these types of products, because firstly, alcohol can damage certain materials. It definitely harms natural leather, and it can also damage some woven materials. So I do not recommend these kinds of products. Many of these products, in fact, do not actually disinfect. They are so-called perfumes, which are meant to replace one smell with another. This definitely doesn't work, because in reality the result is an even more unpleasant odor. Maybe for the first day or two, the scent from the cleaning product will mask the unpleasant smell from the gloves, but after a while the two scents will mix and you'll end up with a completely different effect. I recommend using natural products. In fact, there are a few such natural products available on the market. Some time ago, I used a product called Captain Mind, if I remember correctly. Unfortunately, it seems to be currently unavailable on the Polish market, but I can recommend it, although it is quite an expensive product. It used to be available on the British market, but I haven't seen it on the Polish market for quite some time. However, it was made entirely from natural substances and worked quite well. The second alternative is a product of our own production. This product is called DBX Cleaner. It is also a product that is 100% natural, which uses active oxygen in the cleaning process. Active oxygen is completely safe, it is neutral for fabrics, and it is entirely safe for the skin, which is also quite important, because some amount of the agent will always remain inside the gloves, so the point is that it shouldn't cause irritation or any allergies. And here, with this active oxygen cleaning, you can really very effectively get rid of various types of dirt, exfoliated skin, stains, including mold and fungi. I won't go into the chemical details here about how active oxygen cleaning works. If you're interested in this topic, you'll find plenty of information about it on Google. However, in our product, DBX Cleaner, we use exactly this mechanism. So really, once we finish the drying stage for the gloves and then the freezing, in the final phase, you can simply spray the entire inside of the glove with the cleaner and leave it, this is very important, leave it for a while. I think that after about an hour or two, most of the contaminants will be oxidized by the product. There might actually be some surface residue left, which you can later wipe off with a cloth. In most cases, there won't be anything left, everything will simply oxidize. However, if there is any residue left on the glove lining, you can just remove it with a regular cloth or a piece of paper, and that's really all it takes. What kind of results can you expect? Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, it all really depends on how moldy your gloves are and how long the process has been going on. If the gloves are heavily moldy, you won't achieve 100% effectiveness. If the process has only just started, you can deal with it quite effectively. Some time ago, I did a test during the development stage of this cleaner and dryer product, where we used gloves that were really heavily moldy and mildewed, emitting an unpleasant odor. We went through the entire process, meaning we used the dryer, then freezing, then the cleaner, and we managed to get rid of about 50 to 60% of the unpleasant odor, which I think, considering how moldy the gloves were during the test, was a very good result. If in your case the process in your gloves has only just started, I think you'll be able to handle it 100% with this procedure. Another very frequently asked question is whether gloves should be cleaned. Should they be washed? Should anything else be done with them? You definitely should not wash them, neither in a washing machine nor in an automatic washer, nor even by hand. You have to remember that the inside of the glove is filled with foam. In some models, this filling may be layered. Whatever it may be, it definitely cannot be subjected to heavy soaking, because it will simply ruin the lining in your gloves and you'll end up with clean gloves, but ones that are unusable for training. So you absolutely cannot wash them, but you should clean them. How do you do that? First of all, avoid any products containing alcohol, because, as I mentioned earlier, especially natural leather does not like to be excessively dried out, and alcohol tends to do just that. You also shouldn't clean them with soap. Of course, there are different types of soaps, but in most cases they contain various chemical additives that also cause the leather to dry out excessively. Leather that is very dried out, and this applies not only to leather but to any other material as well, though it's especially noticeable with leather will lose its flexibility. If it loses its flexibility, it will start to crack. So in reality, the best way is simply to wipe the outer part with a damp cloth. Of course, cleaning the outer part of the glove has no effect on whether or not an unpleasant odor will come from them, because as I mentioned earlier, unpleasant odors are caused by fungi and mold inside the glove. However, you have to remember that a lot of bacteria, a lot of impurities and sweat also accumulate on the outside of the glove, which builds up on the surface during training. If you don't clean these gloves and just throw them directly into your backpack, first of all, they'll dirty the inside of your backpack. And secondly, all sorts of dirt will accumulate in the nooks and crannies, in the seams, especially in gloves equipped with additional ventilation mesh. So you should definitely clean the outside of your gloves as well. We already have an additional product in the works specifically for caring for the outer surfaces of gloves. This product will be suitable both for cleaning and maintaining gloves, especially leather ones. At this moment, it's not available yet because we're conducting various tests, but I don't know when you're watching this video. It's possible that by the time you're watching this, the product is already available in our offer, so check below this video, posting links to the products I just talked about. If the link is already there, you'll be able to learn more about this product. However, if you don't feel like buying any cleaning products and just want to clean your gloves, the safest way is to wipe them with a damp cloth. Nothing else. That's all for today. I hope that the few tips I've shared here will be helpful and that you'll be able to take better care of your gloves' cleanliness. I also hope I've made you more aware of how important prevention is when it comes to taking care of your gloves. If your gloves have already developed mold, I hope that with these tips you'll be able to get rid of that unpleasant smell. I'm also curious about your own experiences with gloves. If you have any tried and true methods for dealing with mold in gloves or preventing it from happening in the first place, please share them in the comments below this video. I'd love to hear about them, and I'm sure others interested in this topic would be eager to try out your solutions as well. So once again, thank you for watching, and see you in the next episode. Take care.